Welcome back to the shop and to the channel. In the last episode, we got this left-handed side of the table put together and made the parts for the table crank sleeve. In this episode, we're going to get the right side of the table buttoned up and finish the coolant return system. Next part of this puzzle will be getting this right side bracket assembled and onto the side of the table. The bearings that were originally in this bracket when I got the machine were complete junk. They were so rusted and pitted, they sound like a cheese grater when you crank the handle. So I reached out to the Practical Machinist forum about a source for these because they're nearly impossible to find. One of them, the one on the set on the left, is absolutely impossible to find. And a user of that board offered to send me the bearings that he had out of a machine he scrapped. It seems that everything about these bearing sets is special, including these races that have a shoulder on them. I think the races alone, if I could find them, were somewhere in the $150 range just for the race itself. So these bearings are a set of tapered roller bearings that oppose each other, and if I understand how these are supposed to work, you can adjust the preload on these bearings so that there is no play in between them. Minimizing that play, I understand, translates into better surface finishes. So having a good set of bearings on the most used axis of the machine seems like it would be a very important thing to have. Go ahead and pre-lube these here before I drop in the oil retainer and the back bearing cover. With the inside bearing installed in the bracket, I need to put it on the side of the table now. And as I did with the other side, we'll go ahead and put some Permatex on here to hopefully minimize any kind of oil leaks. Like I did with the inner bearing, I'll pre-lube this outer bearing before I slide it onto the shaft. That little bit of a key slot is what made this bearing impossible for me to find. I found it nowhere. I could find the bearing without the key slot, but not with it. And I'm under the assumption here that this just keeps the bearing from spinning on the shaft. This bearing cover goes on next, followed by a locking collar. This locking collar is ultimately what sets the preload on those bearings, and then it's held in place with a brass plug and a grub screw. And the last thing for the right side bracket is to install this cover. The next thing I want to do on the table here is to get the table screen and the cover for it installed back on the rear of the table. This catches all of the larger chips and whatnot to keep them from getting back into the coolant sump. The holes for the screws were pretty gummed up with junk, so I'm running a tap here into each one of them just to clear out any remaining debris before I try to reinstall this. The next piece that I need to get reinstalled is this coolant return assembly. It's a telescoping set of brass tubes as well as some swiveling elbows that give a path for coolant as it comes off the table to return down into the sump. Well, all the coolant that gets past those screens comes out the side of the table and down through a pipe that eventually ends up down here in the coolant sump. Start the reassembly here by attaching this elbow on the bottom, and of course I'm using Permatex here and hoping to keep as much of the coolant inside the sump as possible. I realize overall it's really pointless to try to get it all because I won't, as you can see. But I'm going to try to keep as much as I can inside the sump and hopefully make cleanup just a little less messy. Doing the same here with the upper elbow that mounts to the bottom of the saddle. Good coating of Permatex and then install it with the 4 screws. What I'm holding here right now is the top end of the telescoping pipe that brings coolant from the saddle down into the sump. Now, where it attaches to the top and the bottom elbows, it will swivel in order to take up the movement of the saddle. Now, the face on this will mate up with the face on those elbows, but there needs to be a leather washer, leather gasket between them. Mine didn't have any on it when I got it, so I'm going to need to make them. I went online and found this piece of leather that is usually used for craft work, I'm sure, but it was thick enough that it would work as a gasket for this coolant return joint. And just measuring with a scale, it looks like the ID of the gasket needs to be about 2 1/8, 2 1/4 inch, and maybe 2 1/2 inch in the OD. So I'll transfer those measurements onto the leather and try cutting this out. Got my high school drafting kit. I actually got this when I was in 11th grade, I think, 10th grade maybe, and I've had it ever since. It is missing a piece, although I can't remember what was in that. I think it might have been a pen maybe. So I'll just set a measurement here with the compass against the scale. Obviously this doesn't need to be super precision. And I'll just use a nice sharp X-Acto blade to cut these out. Well, and unfortunately, I really don't have a nice sharp X-Acto blade, and I don't feel like going to hunt one down, so I'm just going to use a pair of scissors to cut this outer dimension out. I think that's going to be good enough. I'm going to clean up the inside of this. I grabbed my Dremel. It already had a grinding stone in it. The wrong tool bit for this. I probably should have put in a drum sanding attachment, but so I think this will be fine. Well, somehow I managed to blow the inside dimension of this thing and made it too small. I think it'll be easier for me just to go ahead and cut out another one rather than try to trim off a 32nd or 16th of an inch off of that ID. Well, before we get too far down the road with this, let's line it up first. Make it a little easier to adjust the size while it's still attached to the entire leather sheet. Well, I made a mistake in installing that upper elbow. I needed to remove it because there's no way I'd be able to assemble the top end of this down tube with it attached to the saddle. I'm told that along with the leather that these gaskets are also greased. So I've just got some all-purpose grease here that I'm going to lather up here on both sides of the leather. It's the same technique I saw Steve Summers use in one of his videos. Well, to assemble these together, I start with the screw and then a spring, and then a washer goes on top of the spring, and then a felt washer goes on top of that. And I know it's difficult for you to have seen that because all of the media files on the camera that was recording to my right were lost. The SD card got corrupted. Well, we'll soak this felt washer, which I made new because the other ones were just brittle and fell apart, in some oil first before assembling these. And this goes in through the back of that elbow, which is why there was no way I was going to be able to do that with it connected to the saddle. Well, I got to compress that spring with the screw and get it lined up on the face of the down tube piece and get it close enough. And I think the easiest way to get this started, as long as it's lined up, is with the impact. Well, with it started, now I can finish this off by hand with just a box end wrench. Well, I've reattached that upper elbow to the bottom of the saddle. Now I just need to do the same thing we did on the bench with the lower elbow, starting with the gasket, getting it greased up. With that gasket in place, I can go ahead and assemble this screw and the spring, the flat washer, and the felt washer. And just like the top one, I'll get it started here with the impact and then finish it off with the box end wrench. Well, that's all put together now. You can see how as I move the saddle back and forth, how the down tube assembly pivots with it. And if I move the knee down, you can see how it collapses. Well, at this point, I believe the coolant system is all together. I haven't tested it yet because I don't exactly know what kind of coolant I really want to put in here, or should I say cutting oil. I'm leaning heavily toward Mobile Met 426 cutting oil. It's good for all types of metal. The downside is it's about $200 for a 5-gallon bucket, which is what I need here, and right now I just don't have the budget for that, so that's going to have to wait just a little bit longer. Well, that's going to be it for this video. I do appreciate you watching. Don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe if you're not a subscriber. We'll see you on the next one, and thanks for watching.